Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the July 25th, 2022 study session of the Stillwater City Council. I will call this study session to order at this point, and we are going to jump right in with a discussion of our City of Stillwater Parks Master Plan.
Director. Back in January 2021, the City Council authorized us to spend money to develop a master plan for our parks and community resources. We were very excited because this had never been done within our organization, so this would be the first one. We had 12 proposals come in from different firms in 6 states. We narrowed that down to 4 firms and then finally settled on CLS out of Oklahoma City. So Connie Scothorn is here tonight to present, and I want to say it's been a pleasure working with her. We've been through community meetings, staff meetings, surveys, emails, phone calls. It's been a long process, 18 months to where we are today. So, but we're very happy that we are here, and hopefully we can move this plan forward and actually put it into performance. So, before I let Connie come up here, I'm going to thank Jim Scott and John McClinney. It was so nice having 2 former Parks and Recreation directors still working for the city, who I could count on and ask them where the bodies were buried because I did not know. They had a whole history that goes back years and years. So we were able to find all the information, hopefully we were looking for, and Connie could use that to develop the master plan. So tonight she's going to show you a little bit about how they devised the master plan, the process, the findings, and then make some recommendations on where we can go from here. So at this time, I'll let Connie take over.
Thank you, and thank you for having me this evening. Have you all had a chance to look at it?
Yeah.
Stayed awake? It can be pretty ominous sometimes. So I am here representing CLS and Associates, but I'm not the only one on the team. We also worked with Johnson and Associates and their planning staff. Is that better?
Or you can pull it.
You can
too.
pull that.
Yeah, you can pull it. Yeah, there you go. Make it easier.
Okay, how about that? Okay, and then we also had on our team Ballard King, who is a recreational consultant, and we were all here several times in Stillwater. We had several meetings. We had a lot of time to go over your parks, and not just your parks, but your community. So we got to know what was going on here and how the parks work well with the community of Stillwater. You all are lucky with your park system. You have an above average number of parks, above average number of parks per citizen, and above average acres of parks per citizen compared to other communities around the country. So you have a good park system, but of course it can always be better, and that was what our goal was. Now, can you see this screen?
Yep.
I'm thinking not.
There it is.
Okay. So you have 18 parks. We looked at every one of them. We have 6 facilities.
I'm going to put it in full view.
Okay. And we looked at these facilities too. The facilities include the Armory, the Community Center, the Senior Center, the Prairie Arts Center, the Municipal Pool, and Kamioka Trail. So I wanted to separate those from the parks so that you can understand how we looked at them and what we looked at. So the master plan process included evaluating the parks and facilities. This was my favorite part of it because we were actually outside in the parks. We looked at the pros and cons and opportunities and condition, redundancies. We did compare them with national standards and with new trends in recreation. We looked at the location of the parks, how close they were to each other, and how close they were to the neighborhoods, what opportunities were offered in each park, and what might be missing there. We also looked at other recreation in Stillwater, the recreation that's provided by the schools, by OSU, the Botanical Gardens in Meridian Place. Then we looked at Stillwater's demographics. The master plan includes a lot of this information. It talks about who you are, what you like to do, where you spend your money. We also looked at community master plans and strategic plans. And we got input from you. We met with the city staff many times. We met with your stakeholders. And for a community that has so many people at their stakeholders that are really involved in the park system, that's a great thing. We met with your public in a public meeting and then also on an online survey. We asked questions like, what is your favorite park? How close are you to your park? What do you like to do when you're there? What do you not like about your park? How do you want park improvements funded? So we've got, I think, over 800 responses, or near 800 responses from your community, which is a good number. And then I know all of you, or most of you, were also at some of our meetings, so we tried to get as much input as possible. And then we made recommendations for improvement of your parks. We went through each individual park and said these are high priority, medium priority, and low priority improvements that should be made. And then we assembled that information, all of this information, into this beautiful master plan. High priority improvements are generally talking about health and safety. So we're talking about ADA improvements, improvements to reduce pedestrian vehicular conflicts. And by this, we generally mean removing roads that are bisecting parks so that kids aren't having the opportunity to run across the street and get hurt. We looked at needed parking and lighting and renovation of restroom facilities. And we looked at Consumer Product Safety Commission guidelines for safety of playgrounds. Those are the most important high priority improvements, although not necessarily the most fun. Medium priorities probably are the most fun. They're the things that actually would improve your park system. They add things like a dog park or pickleball courts, those types of things that we really want to do, but they're still not as important as those high priority improvements. All of the improvements at Chris Salmon Park would generally be considered medium priorities. It really needs to happen. It's going to be a high visibility improvement, but it would just make that park a better place to be. Low priority improvements, which are still included in all of our cost estimates, are generally deferred maintenance things, striping parking lots, resurfacing parking lots, replacing benches, pruning trees, painting, none of the fun stuff. But it really still needs to happen. So even though we have these divided by high, medium, and low priorities, those priorities don't really relate to the most important things that need to happen. They all need to happen. Wait a minute. Okay, sorry, I skipped a page. Master plan revealed some new recreation facilities are needed. A nature center would be a great addition to the park system. Dog parks, I know you have one, kind of, but you could have two, and that one that you've got could be improved significantly. Pickleball courts are a big thing now. I know I've heard even in Stillwater that people are wanting to see pickleball courts added to your park system. And you have some areas that need to be preserved, like Sanborn Lake, which I absolutely fell in love with, Couch Park and Hoyt Grove, which have some natural areas that should be preserved for education of the public and for wildlife. And there are a few big things that need to happen to your park system. Relocating the park maintenance facility will free up more usable space in Couch Park. while improving safety, because again, we are removing vehicles from the middle of that park. And it will improve the appearance of this beautiful park as well. And then that leaves room for a new state-of-the-art aquatics facility that everybody wants, but it costs a lot. It would add more than what your pool does now, including opportunities for diving, a splash pad, a zero-depth entry, and activities that would attract more people to your park. And the sports complex, which would be a central location for sports and a location to host tournaments. I know there's been a lot of discussion about that sports complex. The trail system, you have a great trail system here, but it isn't finished. And not that many improvements need to be made to make a loop of trails throughout Stillwater. And that trail system would allow not just recreation, but transportation as well. So we made recommendations that would improve the park system as a whole also. Improve maintenance and ways to reduce maintenance. Your parks can be designed for safer and more efficient and more attractive play. And some parks aren't needed. There are places that are not well used, but still require maintenance and security and time and money. These are parks that have also got commercial value, so that if you sold them, you could use those funds to improve the remainder of the parks. These parks that we recommended to be sold are Arrowhead, Berry, Tower, Sunset, Centennial, West, parts of Wittenberg, and parts of Sanborn.
Can I interject here for just a second?
Mm-hmm.
A number of years ago, there was an attempt to abandon Tower Park, and it was wildly unsuccessful. What guidance do you have for how we approach the community in terms of abandoning parks and using those assets in other ways?
Let me look real quick. So I'll start with Tower Park basically has 2 basketball courts, and the basketball courts are not in good condition. So basketball is no longer as popular as it was, and in particular in this location, the fraternities are providing their own basketball courts on site. That's probably 2 major reasons. Plus, this site is just not used. We did, as part of our plan, locate each park and how far apart they are from everything else. Tower Park is in an area that's got parks all the way around it. So that also is another reason why this park is not necessarily needed. And we went into great detail in the master plan about the distance between parks, how far you should have to walk to get to a park, and if this park is taken out of the system, it doesn't make any difference.
I'm not challenging the recommendation. My question is, how do we sell that? Because we had pushback last time we tried to close that park as an example.
And what was the pushback? What were they wanting to keep?
I wasn't on council, but I remember all the commotion.
I don't think I was on council either.
The pushback was that it was a well-used park, and that families in the area frequently used it, and that it had been in existence for a lot of years and it needed to remain.
According to the public survey, 0% of your people said this is their most visited park, and 0% chose this as their favorite park. Those people needed to speak up when we had our public meetings.
I think that that's maybe, right, this seems like it's a very challenging topic, right, for folks that might be in proximity to these public spaces, and how we go about having those conversations. That was one of the questions that I had, was how specifically focused the public conversation was around these areas, and would it benefit us to be more focused on a neighborhood scale to understand the use of these parks and facilities. I wonder, did we just miss the basketball contingent somehow, or did we miss the tennis contingent somehow when we look at Sunset? I know, just speaking personally, like when we look at Sunset, I know our family is involved in tennis, and I know the school uses Sunset, and so you just kind of, I wonder if it would be beneficial in those recommendations to have a more focused conversation with, specifically on those that have amenities besides just open space, I guess is what I was thinking.
I think that same argument could happen with all of these parks that we are recommending should not be kept within the park system. And there's probably 20 reasons for and against. And we did, because it's our job to be somewhat impartial, but we know that your maintenance of your parks needs to be improved, and one way it can be is to reduce the number of parks. The basketball courts at Tower Park are not really in good condition at all. I'm not even sure that it's safe to play there, but.
Okay. I didn't mean to derail your presentation, but if that's something you could be thinking about as talks continue, I think we're going to need some help marketing the idea of closing parks.
Right, and I mean, the part of the master plan does talk about, we know this is not going to be a very acceptable recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay, now I got to remember where I am. Some facilities could be used better. Better services could be provided to your senior citizens if they are moved out of the senior center. And that's moved to the community center, and that's only after improvements are made to the entrance and to the parking lot and to the hot water systems. The community center right now is kind of scary, and I can see why a lot of people wouldn't want to go there. I mean, the entrance is the scary part. The building's great. So I think you would have a lot more activities for seniors, and they would have much better facilities if they're moved. The Armory building could offer much better activities. And the municipal pool, I don't think anyone doesn't believe this, is old and needs to be replaced. So I'm not going to go into this slide in detail, but I do have a nice little summary of park improvements don't come cheap. Again, the high priority improvements, excluding the aquatic center and the sports complex, are around $8 million. And we make recommendations for funding of all of these things within the master plan, lots of details. Lots of the low priority maintenance items should be done within the maintenance budget, but they'll probably need a bigger budget in order to be doing some of these things. It's an opportunity for you all to look at how much you want to invest in your park system. But when you do think of that, think about how much you could sell Tower Park for. So this master plan is for Stillwater. It could not have been done without your staff. We met with them several times. And your involved citizens. Makes a big difference. So this is a roadmap for the city of Stillwater to address your crucial issues and start working towards improving your parks. I'm waiting for you to say something.
I was stifling a yawn, actually. I apologize. Nothing about the presentation.
So if you have any more questions, it's a, 200 and some page document. It's hard to summarize in 10 minutes, but there is a lot of information in here about how we made these recommendations and why. And I'm sure you'll have a better park system if you start working this way.
Well, we appreciate you being here to present even just a short summary of the plan, and it is quite extensive, and honestly, there's a lot of information here, I think, in reference to conversations about what we should do with parks and previous conversations about parks, and we didn't necessarily have this level of information about where they are, where they're used, how they're used. how people feel about them, that sort of thing. One of my questions, I guess, along those lines would be, given that you do this in communities all over, how would you characterize the involvement and the input of the Stillwater community? Or how was our survey in terms of how many people took it? I mean, do you feel like we had an average, below, above in terms of involvement of the community in helping put this plan together?
I think what impressed me most were the stakeholders, because you have so many. And maybe that's a good and a bad thing that you've got so many people involved. Probably it's a challenge to keep them all together and, not fighting amongst each other. But they all seemed to get along when we were there, and they all seem to be going for the greater good and better park system.
When you say stakeholders, who are you including?
So I'm including SASA, that she's probably one of the biggest ones. Lake Murray, OSU is a good stakeholder. They're very involved. No, I'm not going to be able to think of anybody else.
But
The
Community
soccer
centers.
group was there, and they were represented.
Okay. So, I mean, in terms of just sort of a sense of you feel like you guys had enough information, had enough input from our community to make recommendations that you feel are supported by you had all the information you need to make recommendations.
I think we got good
guess.
information. I always am amazed that more public people don't show up to these meetings.
Yes,
but
we're all,
I'm sure
we all feel that way about most of the things we do here.
And then, frequently they're the ones that, the person that didn't show up is the one that's going to make the biggest complaint. But we got a good input from your community between the public meeting and the survey. I think the survey was probably a good way to get some of the younger people and some of the people that just don't like to get out.
Now that we're discussing this, and terms like closing parks will be publicly discussed, I assume there will be many more people who now decide, oh, maybe I should voice my feelings on this subject. Is it possible to either reopen a survey or to have a continuing sort of survey for folks who go, oh, I didn't realize this was going on. I would like to talk to people about what my park's opinions are.
Well, of course, it's always possible to keep a survey open, but it's not possible to just keep the master plan not being finished either.
Sure.
So, and that's kind of, we've been working since a little bit over a year on this. And we had signs posted, we had things posted on your website. So we did try hard to get people involved.
Yeah, and I certainly, again, I appreciate the difficulty sometimes of getting folks to respond. I would hope as part of, and I don't know in here if there was a conversation about sort of that continuing feedback from the community, and if is that something you see in other places or plans where sort of having that opportunity for people to come in and continue to provide feedback?
That is not usually part of the master plan process. I must say, it makes me curious if you did that, if anybody would show up.
I think it would be interesting to think about the parks that you did say, if we sold the land or we closed them and were able to consolidate, if at that point getting some input on what then needs to go into the low, medium, and high priorities and have them give, some feedback on that. Because the bottom line is we can't continue to keep up with what we currently have. It's not working. And so we're going to have to make some tough decisions on ways that we can look at that, and part of it may be closing parks, part of it may be looking at staffing, and part of it may be looking at, so I'm pleased that we at least have a well-documented document that helps us figure out and gives us some legs, if you will, to put underneath us as we go about making these decisions, because they have to be made. I mean, we are to a point where looking at these pictures, I just was, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just the reality of, I think, a lot of cities and towns when they think about their parks and recreation. That's just a lot to keep up with. So
That's for sure. And a lot of times it helps to have some outside consultant. Sometimes I make fun of
Right.
outside consultants.
Right.
But somebody that's got an objective. We've got nothing here that's saying, I love this park.
Yeah.
This is where I played when I was in grade school.
Well, and we have a few of us on council that can say that. I mean, we grew up here, so I think hopefully that gives us a little bit of legitimacy in saying, yes, even though we grew up at some of these parks, it's time to let that memory go, and let's help the children that are currently in our town and going to be in our town enjoy the outside life that Stillwater could provide if we made some of these decisions now to do that, so.
Right. I think one thing that it's almost impossible for me to show on a screen to show what it does, but we have a map, well, we have several maps in the master plan that have circles around them, and the circles show small parks, large parks, community parks. And the circles show the distance that a person should be between, like 15-minute walk to a small park. You've got a lot of parks, and even if we take out these parks that we're recommending you remove, or parts of them, you still have that 15-minute walk to a park. So Stillwater is lucky in that they have a lot of parks, and that you can do that without actually really affecting someone's ability to walk to a park.
This may be a question for our city attorney. Do we know of any of these parks that, with closing recommendations, have any restrictions on them where they were donated to the city for use as a park in perpetuity or anything like that?
I don't know, and it wasn't something that I was asked or reviewed. As part of the master plan process, did you look at source of funds for any of the existing parks?
Well, Sanborn, and I know you just discussed this because I had to, that did receive Land and Water Conservation funds, and so it will have to be replaced in kind.
It's certainly something that when you do decide to bring it back to an agenda where you would want to actually take action on it, we would review it at that time.
Okay.
Right.
Including if somebody donated a parcel of land to be used as a park forever, that restriction, if that's somehow on that land.
Sure, if the city had any legal obligation regarding the donation, that we would have that documented
Okay.
somewhere when we
All right.
review it.
Thank you.
I have a lot to talk about. I'm very grateful. I think it's such a useful tool for us to have something all in the same place to understand what our resources are and where our opportunities and where our needs are in the community. I hope that's very helpful to staff. I know it must be so challenging to kind of take stock of these things, especially not really having a Parks and Recreation department as we haven't had for a while. So kind of just keeping track of all that. I was very grateful to kind of look at all of those things. I think one of the things that struck me and that I want to make sure we address going forward is that so many of these park facilities are, in poor to fair condition. And so maintenance is something clearly that needs to be top of our list. And I worry about having community or city facilities that are in disrepair or would be considered a blight to our community, especially at a time when we're asking others in our community and the private sector to invest in us, right? So I think that is a wake-up call to me and hopefully to us that we should be investing in ourselves, in our public facilities, when we want others to be investing in our community and in our city. And I hate the idea that any of our facilities would be considered, less than or, in disrepair or in some sort of dilapidated state. And certainly as you look at some of these facilities, they would definitely be considered that. So I think one of the things I hope to focus on is how exactly we implement this into an action plan. The success of any plan is its ability to be implemented, and so it seems like a discussion, immediately of budget and immediately of some of these needs and challenges needs to be kind of at the first and foremost of our to-do list. And if, looking at abandoning some of these parks or selling some of these parks is how we get there, it just seems like that needs to be, it's exciting to think about what new facilities we could add, but if we can't take care of the facilities that we have, I think that's first and foremost, and something I was kind of just sad to see.
What do you want to do about it?
I guess I'm trying to think back. I don't know. Maybe it's a function of how we it was interesting for me, actually, not having been on council when kind of that transition from having a Parks and Rec department was here, to kind of read how we have budgeted for these things in the past and kind of where that gets maybe lost. I think we don't necessarily, I don't know that I recall since I've been on councils, like seeing a parks, I don't know, maybe we have a specific parks budget. I know we look at mowing and we look at some landscaped areas, but a better, more highlighted understanding of, I mean, maybe we have to, I think that's a recommendation in the plan, actually, to have a line item that's named that. That seems like a good start, and I don't know that, I know you have kind of these low, medium, kind of high priority pieces, but understanding like what our actual budget is, like this year compared to what we would actually need to be able to do in a year, and how we, I don't know what I guess as I was reading, I just didn't know like how far off are we in what we're currently budgeting compared to what we need to be budgeting. I think that's, as policymakers up here, that's probably first and foremost, is to understand how far off, and I don't know that I have an understanding of that.
Was a budget analysis part of any of your review? I mean, did you do any kind of like historical budget analysis or
We did
anything like
not.
that? Okay.
We have cost estimates, and we didn't, because it was information that was here and there and everywhere, and we never did find out how much you are spending on mowing the parks even right now.
But you all did one of the recommendations was to have those kind of accounts set up to where
Yes.
that could be tracked,
Right,
so that we would have a better sense of that.
right.
Well, I think we could certainly tell you how much we spend on mowing the parks. So some history here, when and this was before my time as well. The emphasis was on public-private partnerships because of the revenue situation with the city and the condition of our streets, and the concern of the then council that as much revenue as possible go to the streets. And we have continued along those lines. And in fact, I think all of you are aware that we're talking about continuing public-private partnerships right now that would replace some of those high-value venues that have been discussed in this report. And we continue to work with those folks and actually have some tentative plans on how to do a sports complex and how to finance it, but it all turns on that other piece that we don't have control over. Once we know that, I think that we can put a pretty good plan in place. As far as the existing parks, I'll tell you that when I first came into this job, that Tower Park discussion was going on, and nobody seemed to know how much it was being used. We put a camera on it for 2 months, and I don't remember the exact results. I'm looking over at staff, but I think it was used a couple of times out of that entire 2 months. And it wasn't the coldest time of the year, and it wasn't the hottest time of the year. We did it when the temperature was temperate. So I think there are things that we could do, that we have some very valuable property that could be sold. I will probably get taken to the cleaners for this, and that money reinvested in additional assets. There's room at Couch Park to increase the tennis courts and put in the highly prized pickleball courts and some of those things, so that could be done, and renovate those neighborhood parks that we choose to keep. So,
And I think it's that telltale sign of being sentimental about something, and then you let someone know that we might want to sell it, and then the guarantee that the money goes back into the parks. I mean, I think there needs to be a very transparent and honest discussion about that, so that there's, because it doesn't matter if it's not being used or not. To them, it's sentimental, and it's, it's an empty piece of land that they don't want to see high-rises. I'm being sarcastic, but I mean, I think in their mind, they think you're just going to build some more concrete things. So I think letting them know that we want to sell it, but then the assets from that sale go into something that will create something even more beautiful or improve something we already have. It's all in the messaging, I think, in doing that. And I'd rather people be angry at me at the very beginning, but then be very transparent and honest with what we're going to use those funds for. And it's going to go back into the park system and not for something that has nothing to do with that.
Well, and in all honesty, regarding the maintenance and the budget for those items have been continued at the same level it was when we came into these positions. Hasn't changed. Although John McClenny isn't here, I think we did increase the frequency of the mowing at some of them.
We did.
So, are there some of them that are in pretty bad shape? Yep. We know it. Just don't have the resources to take care of it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like, right, where this discussion is really helpful, right? How do we, either find the resources or, shift space or do something different so that we can maintain our facilities at a level that we all feel proud of and good about, and right, where the community, it's not being used because they can't use it and it's not in good shape or safe for them to use. It's, the facility is there.
Right, and I think there's one of those pieces of properties that they suggested that would bring a handsome price that could be reinvested. But once again, one tennis court's really expensive, one pickleball court's really expensive. But I think those are some improvements that could be made with those assets. And again, some of those assets are in disrepair or completely vacant in the case of Tower Park, with the exception of the cracked up basketball courts, that cost us just to mow, much less go in and repair it. So I think a lot of those funds could be redirected, is what I'm telling you.
Well, I think some creativity with our stakeholders. We've got Oklahoma State University. Maybe there's a way that some of their departments could help figure out what would be a sustainable landscaping that maybe wouldn't need to be mowed quite as much. Or we have a child development. What is appropriate usage for I don't know. I just think we can, not put so much pressure on the city to do it. I think for me, it's also about making sure we can maintain it and setting up our city staff for success and not setting them up to not be able to meet the demands. I mean, they need to have some success with this too.
No, that's why I think an understanding of the budget and kind of what their
Right.
shortfalls and what role we can play in looking at that, or doing outreach, or doing grant writing, or doing, looking at we do have such strong public-private partnerships. How do we leverage those? I think even just understanding or reading, that, we should probably be coordinating with them a little bit more in terms of how they operate our facilities and take care of our facilities, that there should be kind of those standard operating procedures so that we're maximizing those relationships. And that all seemed like really good kind of policy and programmatic things that would support the long-term sustainability of these facilities. I guess I'm just like, there's an action plan and there's an implementation and there's some ideas about funding, but that's maybe my question to staff is, so we have all this information and we have a few suggestions. What's the first thing that we need to do? And what can we do? And is there additional conversations that need to happen to help make that first step and make it actionable?
I have a recommendation for you, and that is that we hold some public meetings about those suggested places, and that we bring that back to council. And once a decision is made on those places, that gives us an idea of how much additional revenue we might have to put into other facilities. And it also gives us time to have the ongoing conversations. I think that there will be a decision in October on some of the current conversations that allow us to determine where other facilities can reasonably go. And we already have a financing plan that we think is pretty viable. The next couple of weeks will tell that tale.
Good.
I think the other thing that maybe struck me was whether or not, do we have enough staff in these roles? I think that was another recommendation that the plan made, was for some additional staffing, and if that was feasible, and if that was something that was needed more immediately or could wait on some of these other decisions.
We do not have enough staff, nor right now is that feasible. And let me direct you to all the water leaks we've had around town. We're 20% down in that department right now. It's creating problems for us. And frankly, the water at this point is certainly more important
Taking
than
precedence, sure.
Well, maybe I'm a bit of a Pollyanna, but I do think this community steps up a lot in need, and if we provide some wonderful spaces for them to utilize, perhaps there's some buy-in with them to help make sure the trash is picked up, to help make sure maybe it's, bring your lawnmower and go mow. I mean, I don't know. I just think sometimes the community needs to see some intentions and, that's, have a park day or a park week or a park month. I don't know, something that would engage the community as well. I sometimes feel like a lot of times things fall on city staff shoulders, and I think our community can, if they are proud of the areas, I think they will step up.
Yeah, we have had conversations with people who would build a facility, and since I haven't asked them if I'm at liberty to talk about this publicly, I'm going to be a little vague, but that would build a facility on city property and provide access to our citizens for a considerable amount of time in exchange for being able to hold a private program there. If the council were amenable to that, that's certainly something that we could look into further. There have been other people that have come in and they've just flat said, if you'll give me a place to do this, I'll build it. The problem that we have right now is where to locate. Because we think it's pretty important with these ongoing discussions that there be some centralization in all of that, because instead of going from Sanborn to Strickland to the airport to Babcock to maintain the current fields, and I know this is a problem for Carolyn, you get them all in one place, and there is a lot more efficiency available at that point to be able to take care of them. So we have a lot of ideas, but we're kind of waiting to see what fleshes out of some of these other things that are going on, frankly, and hopefully they turn out positive.
Well, this gives us a good roadmap.
That's what we want.
Yeah, and I think the question around, a master plan of this type is a roadmap. There's a lot of recommendations. There's a lot of this needs to be done. Here's a recommendation of how you should do it, that sort of thing. I think we need more detail on some of that. We need to develop some more detail on what exactly we're planning to do with some of these recommendations, because otherwise it's a master plan that I don't know that we're in a position to say, like, to approve a master plan that says we're going to close these specific parks, when I don't know that we know that we're going to do that, right? Or that we don't know that we would accept accept that recommendation at this point. There's more work, I think, that needs to be done before this is an adoptable sort of a document in that sense. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't, there's a lot here that says this is what needs to happen next. And I think that needs to be in, if we're going to call this a master plan, I think that what happens next needs to be in there. So I think there's some work that needs to be done before we do anything with this document.
We haven't had this information kind of all in front of us, right? It's the first time our community has done this, and I think it's almost let it percolate a little bit to understand more specifically how it really impacts our community and what our community thinks about some of these things. But I am actually a planner in my real life work, and I understand that master plans sometimes they have to at some point be adopted so in order to be implemented. So maybe that's a follow-up conversation to understand based on your scope of work.
Yeah, and we've been working on this for a year, and I kind of go, did you read this part? Did you read this part? There's so many different parts to this master plan, and I would say read it again. Read it 2 or 3 times until you can get this is what needs to happen first. I mean, some of it obviously has to be decisions you make. You know the politics behind some of these things. You know who owns this land and what kind of trouble you're going to be in. But on the other hand, this is a recommendation, a lot of different recommendations as to what to do.
Yeah, and I think at the very least what we need to do is sort of look at some of those things and go, okay, yeah, an aquatic facility clearly is something that Stillwater needs to address. Our pool is a mess and not a draw for our community or surrounding communities. But there are some things in the works and some discussions happening with the Y. There's some options with ways we could address that. And so I think maybe even just okay, we understand this is a priority and this is kind of a timeline for when we think that will be possible to address. Maybe just a ranking of some of these priorities, because there are so many different kinds of recommendations in different areas. I think we need to be able to go through it and say, okay, this is something we think we can do now. This is something that we think 3 years or 4 years from now we'll be able to focus on if we get these other things done.
A lot of these things are going to take 3 or 4 years if you start today.
Sure. Yeah, and that I guess would like to see, and I think this is more our work than your work as a consultant, but to kind of read through this, like you said a few times, and sort of go, okay, these are the things I think we need to kind of move to the now section. Let's get started on this now. This is we're going to do that in the future, and maybe stuff that we either take out or just put in the maybe at some point in the future kind of a section, just so that there's a little bit more
Clarity.
What's that?
Clarity on what
Yeah,
it
and
is our
just
next
sort of
steps are gonna
like
be.
say, okay, like if we look at this in
Prioritizing.
2 years, can we go, okay, did we actually do anything with this master plan, right? Did we actually, were there steps? I mean, here, I think we could check off 5 or 6 things, but they're kind of all over the place. I would like for us to be able to put in place a narrower list of things we're going to do right now, and then some things we're going to do as we move forward from there. Some staging, maybe, I guess, to it, because I think, I think the idea of closing and selling some of our current parks and using that funding to fund what else needs to happen in our park system it needs to happen, right? It clearly needs to happen. We clearly have some underutilized parks. And so figuring out what those need to be and getting that put in process is probably, step one. Some budget analysis would be in that step one. Identifying, and you say, in these recommendations, go through and identify what your staffing needs to look like, what your staffing, priority is. And so we put that on the list. Okay, we're going to do that. So some staging of what we think how these things need to happen, I think makes it a little bit more of a usable plan and a plan that can be checked up on as we move forward.
Well, and it provides some consistency so that we're all saying the same thing to the public and having those conversations with the staff that are the same, so that I'm not talking to Barbara on a Wednesday and Mayor's talking to, her on Thursday, and there's 2 different messages. I think that's the other thing. We need to make sure we are all we're all on the same page with that.
Yep. Yeah, because honestly, for to just be totally frank about it, we haven't done this before. We haven't had a master plan. There are a lot of things in here that need to be done. There's just a lot. And we've got to find a way to kind of get everybody narrowed down a little bit on which things need to be focused on first, so that we're not having this,
Right.
oh, hey, well, I thought we were going to do this thing, and well,
Right.
I thought we were going to do this thing, and
Right.
there's no way we're going to do all that stuff at the same time. And so
Right.
we need to figure out a way to directionalize it so that everybody can get on the same page.
I do think one of the things that, and I think it was actually mentioned at the front of this document too, but it's something I feel really strongly about, is that so much of these public spaces are very public. They're very community facing parts of our city, and I think making sure that we're maintaining them and that they look good and that they are safe and accessible and all of those things, I think it really, in a tangible way, but also in an intangible way, kind of speaks to the larger quality of life of our community and kind of how we move about it's not just, right, you can think of it, it's parks, it's just for kids, but you have, senior citizens that are walking their dogs through these areas. You have grandparents that are taking their grandkids to these, spaces, that are visiting these ball fields, that are, it really is our whole community, and oftentimes visitors to our communities that are going into these spaces. And so the importance of these community spaces, I think, is something that I really think a lot about as I drive around town and kind of visit these spaces.
There's a lot of good work in here, and I appreciate what you have done and everybody else who was involved in it. I really appreciate all that. One of the things that really stood out to me is, we're talking about some of the challenges of maintaining our current system, is that the national average for parks per 1,000 residents is 9.9 acres. Not including Lake McMurtry, we have 17.
Right.
So by allowing that to happen over the course of the last, I don't know how many decades, we've created our own maintenance problem. Because we just simply can't realistically be expected to maintain that much park acreage for the size of community we really are.
Yep.
Yep.
It's kind of like the roads.
Kind of like the roads. Why do we build so many roads?
Let's privatize
But
some
I
of
think
those.
it's like, it is, I think that's a great number and statistic to have, because when you look at quality of life surveys and even community health surveys, that's one of the metrics that they use, is your distance to green space or open space or park space. And so the fact that we're far exceeding that, we have some room to make it more manageable for ourselves. We have obviously it's great to have that, but we don't have the ability to take care of all of that. And so we have room there to still kind of score well in that metric and come down.
Well, and that doesn't even include OSU, which is a huge green space. And a huge recreation space.
Well, nor does it include other land that we have inherited through the years that's floodway, and we maintain it, and that is part of this same budget. It may not be right for it to get thrown into the same one, but it does. So,
You mean like other just vacant city land?
yes,
That's not necessarily a park?
yes.
Okay. Yeah, we do need to,
It has very little value, again, because it's in the floodway.
we need to separate that out from a budgeting perspective so we can get a sense of that. And we also need to look at getting rid of it.
Yeah.
Or figuring out what to do with it if we can't, if we're just sitting there mowing it, we need to figure out if there's any other options. But
Goats.
Goats, that was in
like the
there, I
goats.
think, I read.
Well,
we had goats.
We had goats.
let me say, I think that staff is quite capable of bringing you more analysis and an action plan. But you're going to have to, we have a lot of irons in the fire right now.
Mm-hmm.
We need probably a few months to be able to do that. And happy to move forward with that.
Yeah, I think that, and I get that. I think that I'd rather have people who can put the time in that needs to be put in to be able to make those plans well. I think we can start with some of the overall strategy sort of discussions of, are we going to pursue this idea of getting rid of some parks so that we can increase our maintenance budget? Okay, well, let's start looking at that. Are we going, from an overall strategy standpoint, we could start having that discussion and start helping to identify some of those things. I saw, there's a list here of what you're recommending would be the ones that we could lose, and we would still have all the distance things and all that sort of stuff. well, I mean, I can think of specific people in my head who will be very
Yeah, me
upset
too.
about that list
Me too.
and specific parts on that list. But those conversations need to start happening, right? If we don't start having those conversations, we're never going to be in a place where we can make those decisions. So I think there's a timeline where getting all this sort of stuff ironed out will take some time, but there's also some stuff that can get, I think, started more quickly as we go forward.
And looking at budget numbers too, that's important, I think, so we can have an idea of where we're at and where we need to be and all that, so.
Well, and I think we could also start that public discussion about some of those places.
I would,
If the council approves.
I think this would be a good place. Councilor Clark and I were discussing council subcommittees recently. This would probably be a good place for a council subcommittee of a couple folks to take the lead on pushing forward on what the next steps here are as a council subcommittee, so that can kind of be, some more priority can be placed on that outside of our normal meetings, and then can come back to us with a recommendation. So this isn't a place for action tonight, but I think we'll talk, or if we'll put it on an agenda in the upcoming future to appoint a subcommittee to deal with pushing the master plan forward.
One thing that we haven't talked about yet, but I was wondering in terms of like phasing or staging, was the facilities, some of the discussion of facilities, the senior center and the community center and kind of those. I didn't know if those types of plans could be implemented more quickly or would make sense to implement more quickly, or if those also kind of needed the same more refined stakeholder discussion before those happened.
As far as the entryway to the community center, there are two entryways, and the backside of it's the one that's problematic. An RFP is either out or is going out in a couple of days.
Good.
Okay. And so hopefully that will be addressed. I didn't know about the hot water issue, but
And we are taking care of the hot water issue.
okay.
And the bid will soon be out for the construction of the new entryway to
Right.
the community center. And we've also, Carolyn and I have looked at air conditioning the Armory Gymnasium, which would take care of a lot of issues with pickleball
Yeah.
and some of those other activities that go on in there. So we've kind of looked at the plan, and we've kind of started easing our way towards some solutions.
And it sounds like some of these things kind of have a domino effect. You do one thing and it kind of, which just
Right.
momentum, and it helps give some, some oomph behind some things and maybe some excitement. So-
Right, yes, but looking at outdoor locations, yeah, we have other irons in the fire, so right now we're kind of waiting.
Well, and I would say to you that entry project is again a city-private partnership with Community Center Foundation. So we're grateful to them for bringing that project forward.
And I'm trying hard to get Carolyn to come up with the $80,000 for the air conditioning in the
But,
gym.
no one
so-
won the lottery a couple nights ago, so.
I think one other thing that would be, I was just looking over all the survey results at the end of the document that we had, and looking at, I guess, some things in combination. So the parks that people most go to was one of the questions: what park do you visit most? And then I call these cross-tabbing that with how important is it to have a park within walking distance, or I moved to this neighborhood and I really like that I have a park, but we don't know what parks those people are talking about. So are the people who it's important to be close to a park and they live where they do because of that, because they all live by Boomer Lake? Or is it spread out across all the parks across Stillwater? And so I think it would be interesting so I'm a data geek, but it'd be interesting to look at some of those questions and the responses in combination. And so I don't know what the data looks like, or if we have access to the data to be able to do some of that. I'd be happy.
We
to
can
do
give you
some.
the raw data, and you can.
It'd be great.
You can just.
I
go
would
crazy
love
with
it. I mean, I just
You
think,
just made Counselor Hawkins mad.
Exactly.
I mean, I think some of that's important. I think it gives a different context to how people responded. And I think it said we had 780 responses. I mean, that's not a huge number given the number of people in Stillwater, but it's still enough that it would at least give us an idea. I mean, that's the data that we do
And it would be
have.
valuable, you're
Yeah.
right, because it's, what.
And I'd be happy to do stuff like that if we got the raw data. So,
Did we also, wasn't TSET also doing a community, some sort of survey of park space in Stillwater? Did they do their own? I thought I'd talked with Melinda at some point and they were doing some sort of survey as well. I didn't know if that would add to the data set.
I assume there's some raw data around park surveys like statewide or other stuff, because that would be interesting to put in some of those
yeah.
analyses to try to figure out how does this compare. But
Councilor Hawkins is getting more and more excited.
I know.
As the more time goes by.
I mean, you would imagine, of course, I think we find this very often in community surveys, and in life right now, right? You get the extremes of opinions, right? People that choose to participate usually feel strongly about the survey that they're participating in, either kind of for or against that thing. We don't very often find, we somehow have trouble accessing the people in the middle, right? It's usually the people that feel really strongly about it. So I imagine we'll find that as we further this discussion.
That's
that
how
we will
teacher
also-
evaluations work anyway.
other comments for tonight or questions?
I had one last thing, sorry. I worked on Strickland Park, so I've been really thinking about parks a lot over the last couple of years. So one other thing that kind of struck me when I was looking at facilities, and then our discussion earlier about stakeholders, and a lot of our stakeholders are our public-private partnerships, and a lot of the anticipated opportunity that we have coming up would also include those public-private partnerships. And I know we have some really strong relationships there. I was curious if we could look into integrating those relationships a little bit more. I know I was on a Block 34 discussion the other day, and we have like not the Friends of the Community Center, group that meets as a nonprofit. It really struck me that the city should have some sort of ex officio like representative, if they're like or some like more consistent contact. And I don't know what that looks like with SASA. Like, is it just kind of as needed we have conversation, or is it a more formal, if we want to work with those partners to maintain facilities and to leverage those partners and their ability to expand our facilities or what have you, how do we integrate those partnerships so that our connections and conversations are more like programmed in? Does that make sense?
Yes, and I'm the liaison with all the public-private partners, and I think they have pretty good access to me. And Carolyn, I spend half my day, it seems like, with her sports programs in those facilities. But like the Friends of the Community Center, they have Stephanie on speed dial, and we are in constant contact with them when they do their events. And I don't know if they prefer we not come to their, they come up with the ideas and then they run through us. And
I just didn't know if there was like a formal, or is it just kind of an informal, like, hey, I need something, or is there a more formalized, like, not planning process, but like, do you meet like quarterly to say like, this is what we have coming, this is what we had going, this is what we could improve, this is what people are telling us we need, this is what's broken today, what we need fixed tomorrow?
Right.
Is it formalized in that way, or is it just kind of like we're available, of course, to have those conversations?
No, I send out feelers to them all the time,
Yeah.
and they're very good at emailing me. And like I said, usually they bypass me and go directly to Stephanie, the community center, because she's so familiar with the facility and all those
Sure.
people. So we, Lake McMurtry, even Tiny Paws, we maintain close contact with them and check and make sure they're doing okay and see what they need. So
Okay.
Well, in fact, one of the other things, like, we didn't have a formal agreement with soccer, and Becky has been working on that to try to bring those groups together so that we can have more contact with them and that daily kind of thing. So,
Yeah, it just struck me like, wow, we're really leaning into these partnerships, and just having those more formal conversations might be helpful.
yeah, I'm in contact with Edwin Sutherland quite a bit, and we make sure everything's
Get
going
those
well.
passionate people.
Everything's getting mowed, irrigation, whatever they need. I'll check and make sure that they're up and running. So
Okay.
I know you didn't mention Strickland so that I would say this, but it was very clearly our highest rated park, which goes to show that taking an interest and also spending several $100,000 on parks actually does improve them. Which
Does.
is,
And I go there often just to watch everybody make great use of that park. It's really heavily used. I think we have a lot of people that just go and sit on the porch swings and spend time with their families there. And the library's added amenities there with the story walk. And I think, but going through that process, I think it really struck me when you have a community that all comes together to fund such a special project like that. We want to protect that investment and show the community that will, make plans to take care of it, into the future. I know we've done that at Strickland with like making sure the shade structures, like the shade sails come down so that they're protected in the weather, and just, it's amazing it's amazing the amount of work
It
that
is.
goes into maintaining these facilities and how much thought and care and planning you have to do. And I know when we make improvements like that, it adds to the load, but I'm really grateful for those things.
and I think people, well, I don't know this for sure, but I think people, given the choice between, several small, not super well maintained, not, stuff that doesn't have a whole lot to do in it, people aren't using it a lot, but the choice between having several of those and maybe 2 or 3 really nice, well maintained parks that have those kinds of amenities, that have the things that people want to do, and that people feel safe and comfortable and have fun going to, I think that helps us say, I mean, these are our choices, and we don't have unlimited resources. So would you rather we have these several parks that don't really have much to do, or we consolidated some of that and we created more spaces like what we have at Strickland, where there is a real cohesive and nice, beautiful place to be? I think people understand that that's
Yeah,
worth.
I agree.
worth-
I mean, I
worth the
think
investment.
finding a way to focus funds and really spending where we think we'll get the most, optimize the community's use and the number of people that are using it and the amenities that we can provide there seems like a really smart thing to do. Clearly, we're kind of extended farther than we can really manage right now, which, I mean, we just need to correct it and course correct a little bit and kind of figure out the numbers to make
Yep.
that work.
And to spend the time and effort actually talking about it and figuring out what to do next. Yeah.
But when we do improve these parks, we'll have to look at security and how beautiful Strickland is.
And we've had trouble.
We've had quite a bit of trouble.
We have, much to my,
And of course, the little library was completely demolished. We have a homeless problem in Strickland.
We have
That
our
bathroom's
first
very popular to live in.
Yes, we had our first graffiti. I was just there
Lot
the
of
other day.
graffiti.
First graffiti there. It is,
Yes.
yeah, it's sometimes devastating to think that something that so many people cared so deeply about and contributed to,
Right.
right, that I was Pollyannish and thought if we
You think if you build a
if
beautiful
we invest
place.
and do this thing that's really special, that people will protect it and take care of it, and that's unfortunately not always the
Right.
case. But
I-
and I agree with you. I think security is
We're
very important.
probably cameras, something we're going to have to start putting in parks and when we build these up to keep an eye on everything. So
Yeah.
Carolyn, usually at least once a week, they're removing homeless people from the dugouts before they play games. So
Yeah.
it's,
Just maybe another
It-
issue to tackle, right? Another day. But
yeah, let me
I-
tell you about my homeless camp I want to put in North Couch Park. So
Well, and let me say that Community Resources did hopefully something that will impact that problem today in standing up a cooling station in front of the community center.
We
That's
did.
true, that's true,
And
Yes.
so
that's true.
that will be an alternative that people have. They can also go into the lobby. There's bathrooms available. There's cold water. They did an outstanding job putting this thing up in just a little bit of time.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, we had several phone calls asking for cooling stations, and then I think Switchboard had some. So we thought, where can we do this at in the community center? Stephanie had staff who could do it, and it was easy for us to set up, so it really worked out nicely.
That's great.
And it seems like Southern Woods, Babcock, and Strickland have a lot of those type of issues, so hopefully they can come towards the community center and
Yeah,
keep cool
Yeah.
if they need to, so.
Okay. Any further comments or charges or?
I guess I'll just say thank you.
Inspiration.
Thank you. I think, keep in mind, not everything has to happen at one time. Not everything has to happen, but it's important to start moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work on this, and we'll continue moving forward with it.
Great.
Counselors, anything further? I don't have anything else on an agenda, so is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the study session. Please vote. We voted 5-0. We're now adjourned. Thank you all.